Ms. Tin Pei Ling.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for allowing me to speak in this meaningful debate on the White Paper on Singapore women's development. This marks yet another key milestone in Singapore's long journey towards removing barriers and empowering Singapore women. This House has seen many exchanges and recommendations on how we can empower and advance Singapore women over the past 6 to 7 decades. Personally, since entering this House in 2011, I have also heard many suggestions made by fellow MPs and seen real policy changes implemented to resolve pain points and provide stronger support to Singapore women. Humbly, I, and together with fellow PAP women MPs, contributed modestly to the cause by moving a private member's motion titled Aspirations of Women in 2017. Therefore, now that a white paper is completed and introduced, this is certainly a significant leap forward as tangible actions will be taken to further Singapore women's development. And of course, in this House, I've also covered a range of topics talking about women in workplace, women in tech, as well as digital competency. But in this speech today, I would like to just share and address 2 feedback that I've heard so far and some suggestions in the area of empowering women in their careers and protecting girls from harm. One category of comments I have heard is whether we are overly promoting women's rights. Comments include, some jokingly and some not so jokingly, whether we should also have a men's charter or white paper on Singapore men's development, and whether we should promote women to higher positions for the sake of it, thereby compromising meritocracy potentially. Clearly, efforts to champion Singapore women's development cannot be to demand women's rights just because it sounds politically appealing. Rather, it is about ensuring fair play and choice. It is to ensure that, for instance, between a male and female candidate of comparable competency or potential, the female one does not get filtered out or be considered as a lesser candidate because of biases such as, oh, she is of childbearing age and may have to take time off to give birth, or, oh, she has young kids and will have to take childcare leave or be distracted now and then. This is something that I experienced in 2015 when I first gave birth. I remember this as a comment during the general election. This was leveled against me. And, oh, women are more emotional, less decisive, and harder to follow. Well, we need to address such attitudes and comments. First, there is a need to make the entire environment, employers, and society to be more empathetic and supportive towards women. Second, just as women in Singapore today have control over our own bodies as law enforcement authorities do not turn a blind eye to crimes against women, there is also a need to punish and deter the worst abuses against women at the workplace as well. This is to ensure that women are not disadvantaged for recruitment and promotion. Third, beyond breaking the biases, it is also putting in place support to free up women's capacity so that they can pursue other worthy aspirations to be an equal partner. We have seen women going places. We have seen how women are able to hold our own and make it out there. And yet, we have to ask ourselves, is it enough? Is it already leveled? Are there other barriers that are in place that are prohibiting women from going out there to fulfill their fullest potential? And therefore, with this paper and by supporting Singapore women's development, I believe it is also about fulfilling the potential that has been untapped. And so this leads to the topic of caregiving. Another feedback that I have heard is whether having a whole segment on caregiving in a paper titled Singapore Women's Development will reinforce the gender stereotype that caregiving is exclusive to women. I fully understand the concern towards this. Anyone can be a caregiver, and it is a noble responsibility to care for another life, especially if the care recipient is a loved one. Caregiving should ideally be a shared responsibility regardless of gender. However, the current reality is that women disproportionately forms the majority of caregivers. A recent government survey, for example, found that women in dual-income households were 5 times more likely than men to be managing housework and giving care. Hence, even as we continue to educate and change mindsets, we must address this caregiving issue now so that women weighed down by caregiving duties can have the capacity to also pursue their other life aspirations. I am glad that the white paper recognizes this current reality. Furthermore, caregiver support policies are not exclusive to women, but benefit male caregivers as well. Notably, the increase in home caregiving grant is welcomed. It is a significant increase in support for low-income households. The grant will not fully compensate for caregiving, and it is not meant to do so. But it recognizes the sacrifices that caregivers make and reduce the trade-offs that caregivers face. The increase in grant may also cross the threshold for the household to finally get help so that the caregiver can take up a part-time job and keep a career on track. It may also mean having funds to get that much-needed respite care when the stress on the caregiver becomes overpowering and she needs a break. I wish to highlight the importance of enhancing respite care. Caregiving is a 24/7 responsibility. It is mentally and physically draining. Hence, readily available and accessible respite care, especially for full-time caregivers, are important to reduce burnout. However, full-time caregivers would usually have been out of the workforce for some time and suffer relatively weaker finances. As MOH reviews the respite care landscape, I hope that the MOH will also consider, number one, increasing institutional capacity for respite care across Singapore, even as MOH explores home-based respite care, because not all homes are suitable and caregivers usually prefer to keep their loved ones near as they may have separation anxiety. And number two, exploring more flexible financing options, including greater use of extended family members' Medisave to pay for respite care services, beyond enhancing home caregiving grants, which works like a subsidy. On a note related to caregiving, though out of the scope of this white paper, I wish to again highlight the topic of migrant domestic workers. The role of migrant domestic workers remain integral to how Singaporean families choose to provide care or supplement caregiving for their loved ones. Firstly, an MDW can offer care one-to-one and hence more human touch, more personalized and personable. Secondly, this offers greater flexibility to families with members having to work. Migrant domestic workers therefore help to free women to focus on work and other pursuits. However, in many instances, the migrant domestic workers may have caused more grief than relief to their employers. I had shared the challenges faced by Singaporean families and indeed Singapore women in my adjournment motion last November, so I shall not repeat them here. I should also note that the dire situation has improved as the supply of migrant domestic workers have eased. Nonetheless, there are still instances where employers feel that the system is tilted in favor of the migrant domestic workers when disputes arise and employers are left to prove their own innocence to the authorities while scrambling to pick up the pieces at home. While I understand that the migrant domestic workers, by virtue of them being a foreign country, are assumed to be of lesser resource and that over-reliance on migrant domestic workers is more a bane than boon, the reality is that families and therefore women of such households need migrant domestic workers to support caregiving at home. Hence, I urge the government to pay greater attention to this matter and be more sensitive to the circumstances and needs of such households, especially those of middle and lower income. Because time taken to settle these disputes means time away from productive and fulfilling work. Another point I wish to highlight is better protection of young girls from harm. Several of my youth volunteers at Macpherson are passionate about this and recently organized a few webinars under the Action for Her movement centered on protection of girls against online harms. Issues explored range from body shaming to cyberbullying to sexual harassment. And hence, I believe the actions set out in Area 3 of the White Paper are pertinent and I support them. But I also wish to highlight the importance of protecting girls from violent or sexual misdemeanors at home. This can be especially salient in complex family settings that are dysfunctional or where the parents are undergoing acrimonious divorce. Children look up to their parents as role models and they pick up ideas from their surroundings. They must not be led to think that the misdemeanors they are exposed to at home are normal. And more importantly, to ensure that girls in such households and settings are not led to growing up thinking that they are weak and do not deserve happiness like any other. Hence, we must better protect our girls intervene sooner when necessary, bring them into safer environments sooner so that they can grow up with the right values and in an environment that brings out the best in them. Notwithstanding my questions raised, sir, I believe the white paper holds great significance in our continued journey to support Singapore women to fulfill their fullest potential and aspirations. So much has been said in this House. The white paper's greatest value is that it sets out specific actions to be taken, and hence I support the motion.